My name is Robert Hayes, and for 38 years I believed I understood the people closest to me. I built a successful construction company in Ohio with nothing but long days, sore hands, and promises I refused to break. After my first wife passed away, loneliness became louder than common sense. That's when I met Vanessa. She smiled like someone who could stitch a broken family back together. I thought I was getting a second chance at happiness. I was wrong. The warning signs were tiny at first. Vanessa insisted on handling the household bills because she claimed numbers relaxed her. She slowly convinced me to let her organize meetings with our financial advisor. Whenever my son, Ethan, questioned her decisions, she would laugh and say he was simply jealous that his father had finally found someone who cared. I hated conflict, so I chose peace over suspicion. Then my health failed. A mild stroke left me weak for weeks. While I recovered, Vanessa became everyone's source of information. Friends called her instead of me. Even my lawyer began scheduling appointments through her. Every decision seemed to pass through my wife before it reached me. One rainy afternoon I overheard her whispering on the phone. "Once the paperwork is accepted, everything belongs to me." When she noticed me standing in the hallway, her smile returned instantly. "You should be resting," she said. Something about her eyes felt unfamiliar. The next morning my attorney phoned, congratulating me on updating my will. I froze. I never changed my will. Silence filled the line before he quietly replied, "Robert, I watched you sign it myself." But I had never been inside his office that day. Someone had signed my name. And whoever did it wanted me to disappear before I discovered the truth. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my attorney's words repeating in my head. "I watched you sign it myself." Either he was lying, or someone had managed to convince him that another man was me. The next morning, I drove to his office without telling Vanessa. My hands were still unsteady from the stroke, but anger was stronger than weakness. When my attorney placed the new will in front of me, my stomach dropped. There it was, my name in blue ink. At first glance, it looked exactly like my signature. But I'd signed thousands of contracts over the years. I knew every curve of my handwriting better than anyone. Whoever forged it had copied the letters, but not the pressure. I always pressed harder on the final S. This signature ended lightly, almost as if the writer was afraid to leave a mark. "I didn't sign this," I said. My attorney frowned. "Robert, you sat in that chair 3 weeks ago." "No. I was in Mercy Hospital recovering from a stroke." The color drained from his face. He pulled out his appointment book. The date matched the week I was still under medical supervision. There was no possible way I could have been there. Then he remembered something. "There was another person in the room," he whispered. "State law required an independent witness because of the changes. I didn't know her personally. She was filling in for someone who called out sick. Do you know her name?" He flipped through the paperwork. "Grace Miller?" Either of us recognized the name. My attorney immediately requested the security footage from the office building, hoping it would identify the woman. Hours later, the building manager apologized. The cameras had been offline that entire afternoon because of a power system upgrade. Convenient. Too convenient. As I walked to my truck, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. "How did your visit with the lawyer go?" I had never told her where I was going. She wasn't just guessing anymore. Someone was feeding her every move I made. I didn't answer Vanessa's text. Instead, I drove to Mercy Hospital and requested copies of my medical records. I wanted proof that couldn't be argued with. Every page confirmed the same thing. I was admitted, monitored, and treated the entire week my new will had supposedly been signed. Someone had committed fraud. The bigger question was how. My attorney called later that afternoon. His voice sounded different, less confident. "Robert, I found Grace Miller." My heart skipped a beat. Did she remember me? She remembered the meeting, because something about it bothered her. An hour later, I met Grace at a quiet coffee shop outside town. She looked nervous, as if she'd been carrying a secret for weeks. The man I witnessed wasn't sick, she said carefully. He barely spoke. Every time I asked him a question, your wife answered instead. I leaned forward. Did you think it was strange? I did. But she introduced herself as your caregiver and said you were recovering from a medical condition. I believed her. Then Grace reached into her handbag. I almost threw this away. She placed a small folded receipt on the table. I unfolded it. There, in neat handwriting, was the exact date and time of the signing, along with one sentence that made my blood run cold. Woman called man Daniel by accident before correcting herself to Robert. Daniel. I didn't know any Daniel in my family. But Vanessa did. Daniel Brooks was her younger brother, the man who looked enough like me that strangers often did a double take, especially with a baseball cap and glasses. Grace hadn't realized the importance of what she'd heard until my attorney contacted her. Vanessa hadn't forged my signature herself. She had brought her own brother to impersonate me. For the first time, we weren't dealing with suspicion anymore. We had a witness, my hospital records, and a name. What Vanessa didn't know was that my attorney had already contacted the probate fraud unit. Now we weren't just preparing to challenge the will. We were preparing to let her believe she'd won, right until the moment the truth walked into the room. My attorney asked me a question I never expected. Robert, are you willing to stay quiet a little longer? Every instinct told me to confront Vanessa that very night. I wanted to slam the hospital records onto the kitchen table, look her in the eye, and ask how long she'd been planning to steal everything I'd spent my life building. Instead, I nodded. If she believed her plan had worked, she'd make mistakes. And that's exactly what happened. Over the next 2 weeks, I acted like nothing had changed. I thanked her for making dinner. I smiled through conversations that made my stomach turn. Every fake smile from her felt rehearsed now. She thought she was living with a man who had no idea she had already written him out of his own legacy. Then the cracks began to show. I overheard her telling Daniel, "Just a little longer. Once everything is transferred, we're free." She didn't know that my attorney had already instructed me to keep a journal, recording dates, times, and every suspicious conversation. None of it would prove the forgery by itself, but together it painted a picture of intent. A few days later, Vanessa hosted a family dinner. She raised a glass of wine and smiled across the table. "To new beginnings," she said. She had no idea that Ethan had quietly joined my attorney and me earlier that morning. Seeing the evidence had broken his heart. He apologized for every time he'd warned me about Vanessa and I refused to listen. I told him something I needed to hear myself. "Trust isn't a weakness, son. Betraying it is." The following Monday, my attorney called. "The probate judge has scheduled a hearing. Vanessa believes it's just a routine approval." Perfect. She spent the next week shopping for a new luxury SUV and talking about renovating the house. She was already spending money she didn't legally own. When the morning of the hearing arrived, she walked into the courthouse wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in years. She looked at me with quiet confidence, certain that the forged will had secured her future. Then the courtroom doors opened. Grace Miller stepped inside. Right behind her came Daniel, escorted by 2 investigators. For the first time since this nightmare began, Vanessa's smile disappeared. The silence inside that courtroom was heavier than any sentence a judge could have spoken. Vanessa turned toward her brother, her face drained of color. Daniel couldn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on the floor as the investigators led him to the witness stand. Under oath, the truth finally surfaced. Daniel admitted Vanessa had begged him to impersonate me. She had given him one of my old suits, my reading glasses, and even coached him on how I signed my name. She promised him it was just paperwork, and that no one would ever question it because I was recovering from my stroke. She was wrong. Grace Miller testified next. She calmly explained how she remembered Vanessa accidentally calling the man Daniel before correcting herself. Then my attorney submitted my hospital records, proving I had been under constant medical care at the exact time the forged will was signed. The evidence fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The judge declared the new will fraudulent and legally void. My original will was immediately reinstated. Vanessa didn't inherit a single dollar. But that wasn't the end. The district attorney's office announced criminal charges related to forgery, fraud, and identity deception. As officers approached, Vanessa looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Robert, please. Tell them I made a mistake." I met her gaze for the last time. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is taking the wrong exit. You planned this while I was fighting to recover. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice." She had no answer. Months later, our divorce was final. Ethan and I slowly rebuilt the relationship that her lies had nearly destroyed. We spent weekends fishing again, just like we had when he was a boy. For the first time in years, my home felt peaceful instead of tense. I also updated my estate plan one final time, with multiple safeguards, independent witnesses, and instructions that could never be manipulated again. People often ask if I hate Vanessa. I don't. Hate would mean she still occupies space in my heart. She doesn't. She thought changing my will would erase the life I built. Instead, her greed erased the life she wanted. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't watching her lose everything. It was watching the truth protect the family she tried so hard to tear apart.